Anyone who observes social groups can tell you that within any social group, dynamics, patterns, and roles start to emerge. These dynamics, patterns, and roles tend to be quite resistant to change. And some of these patterns, shall we say, are a lot more difficult to change than others. Some are a hell of a lot more dysfunctional than others. And of them, one of the most dysfunctional is a triad pattern, where we fall into either the role of the victim, the villain, or the hero. Before we continue, it's important to understand that this triad position is how we actually subconsciously see the entire world. We fit all people and all groups into one of these roles at any given moment. The human ego's number one enemy is shame. Ego is essentially nothing more than self-concept, and we must see ourselves as good. To understand more about this, watch my videos titled Self-Concept, the Enemy of Awakening, and the Number One Relationship Obstacle and How to Dissolve It. But some people are raised in dysfunctional households where the core self-concept that all the people within this household have is shame. I want to stress, I said all the people within the household. This means the narcissist in the family has a self-concept founded on shame. The codependent has a self-concept founded on shame. The golden child has a self-concept founded on shame. The lost child has a self-concept founded on shame. And the scapegoat child has a self-concept founded on shame. And the list goes on and on. For those of us who grew up in this type of a dynamic, the dysfunction of our lives and the dysfunction of the roles we play in our life, even into our adult life, are founded on the idea that we are constantly trying, in dysfunctional ways, to get away from that shame and to maintain the concept, or shall I say build the concept in the first place, that we are a good person. But what happens for us is that the closest we can actually get to that concept of ourselves as being good is to either be the victim or the rescuer, otherwise known as the hero. We see the victim as the underdog. They're always the powerless, innocent good guy. When we are so dysfunctional that our self-concept is so low that we can only access the feeling of being good when we're a victim, we actually begin a vortex of dysfunctional creation in our lives where we create scenarios where we are not actually the victim, but we feel and act like we are. This is the classic victim-control dynamic. And we also begin to attract constant scenarios where we are the victim, such as accidents. Our lives will be full of villains. We also see the hero as the good guy. So many people enter the healing field and the teaching field because this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to access our own feelings of being the hero. Being the hero involves courage, action, nobility, morality, and selflessness. But we actually begin a vortex of dysfunctional creation in our lives where we are roped into victim-control dynamics, where we defend a false victim against a false villain. We become self-righteous and justify the cruelty we exact upon the villain because we tell ourselves they deserved it. By doing this, we actually become the villain but don't see ourselves as such. We make people sick or cause them to collapse so that we can come in and rescue them, and by doing so feel like we're a good person. We enable people's dysfunction because when they are in their weakness, we can feel like we are a good person. Now, in order to do that, we have to have someone to defend the victim against. Our world is nothing but victims and villains. What makes this triangle dynamic so incredibly obnoxious is that none of these roles exist in a void. By virtue of just being in one of these roles, you automatically create all the other roles. For example, if you slip into victimization, that implies the fact that there is a villain. A victim needs a villain to exist, just like a villain needs a victim to exist. So basically, the second that somebody slips into one of these roles, the other roles are created whether you like it or not. The victim needs a savior and it needs a bad guy. The savior needs someone to defend a victim and someone to defend the victim against the villain. And here's what makes this pattern even more obnoxious. Let's say that somebody sees this dynamic and doesn't want to get into this triangle pattern and says, I'm not going to participate. You just made yourself another villain. Why? Because you're now a bystander to injustice. In a dysfunctional household, these roles of the victim, the villain, and the hero are constantly getting played out. Here's just one tiny example. Let's say the dysfunctional adult actually perceives themselves to be, or plays themselves out to be, the victim to the scapegoated child in the scenario. The scapegoated child, in this case, becomes the villain. They then because they need to be defended because they're the victim, rope the golden child into defending them against the scapegoated child, and by doing so, they become the hero. Here's the other crappy part. We tend to become identified with these roles, and therefore, whichever role we spend the most time in our childhood, we tend to play that role out far into our adulthood. This triad dynamic between the victim, hero, and villain is responsible for the psychology of triangulation, the dynamic where one person splits two other people, pitting them against one another. This triangle from hell dynamic arises out of conflict or perceived conflict. When we feel trapped in conflict, it's usually because we are fitting into one of these triangular positions. The shape of a triangle implies the fact that you're completely stuck, in opposition to one another. Just your very story in the dynamic pigeonholes people into their role, which is resistant to change. There both is and isn't such a thing as true victimization, because we all know that people can be genuine victims. But here's the thing. There's a background story that leads a villain to becoming a villain, and I can tell you that if they tell their story, they're always going to be a victim to somebody else. We are nothing more than the victim of victims. This being said, victimization is the rarity. What isn't the rarity is conflict. In a situation where conflict occurs between two people or two parties, both people have their needs threatened. That's going to cause you to go into fight or flight. It's going to cause you instantaneously to feel like you're in a powerless position. You're going to feel like a victim. Both parties feel innocent and powerless. It naturally makes us want to find someone to rescue us or side with us against the other person who we perceive, due to our own feelings of powerless, to be more powerful than us at this very moment. We feel the need to be defended. This opens the door for the hero role to be filled, and naturally we blame the other person on the other side of the conflict, and by doing so open up the door for the person on the opposite side of the conflict to fill the role of the villain. The villain role is all about power and control. Every negative trait we assign to a villain ultimately boils down to this power and control, but what we have to admit is we all have this within ourselves. If we feel like a villain, we instantly try to gain back that power and that control that we feel like we lost or that we feel like was taken from us. And just by virtue of trying to do so, we become the villain as well. We become self-centered and fight for our needs and our needs alone without regard to impact on any other party. We believe them to be separate from us. If we feel like a hero, we are doing all of these things but justifying it as the right thing to do. I seriously urge you to watch any of these action movies with superheroes in them. If you take away the concept of doing what's right as a judgment that we slap over the face of a superhero, and you just simply watch what actions they're taking, they're killing people, they're stealing things, these are people who should end up in prison. They're villains. But because of the meaning we've assigned to it, they're heroes. And every villain comes with a background story. Nobody ends up in a villain position unless they perceive themselves to be a victim in some way. Now, if you talk to any villain, any perpetrator, they're going to tell you that they believe what they did is right in some way, because they were the victim. For example, we call terrorists villains, but I can tell you that the people who are of the same ideology as they are see them as saviors. A villain is as much a hero in disguise as a hero is a villain in disguise. What changes is how we judge them. And judgment, I'll tell you, is incredibly subjective. Social groups are being divided by this dynamic every day, because when this triad pattern occurs, it demands that all parties involved with the conflict have to choose sides, for and against. And the minute that that dynamic is set up, you've got a zero-sum game, where I win and you lose. But here's the thing. I win and you lose doesn't work long term, because nobody's okay with actually losing. Their needs actually have value to them. And this is what breeds revenge. And when revenge is acted out, a win-lose game turns into a lose-lose game. What you gotta realize is that every war has started from this very dynamic. Somebody sees themselves as the victim, someone sees themselves as the villain, and someone sees themselves as the hero. They all feel justified in their position, and in the end, it's always a lose-lose game. In order to solve this dynamic and break free from the stuckness of the triangle, we need to seek resolve instead of victory for our own needs. We need to step back and consciously see the role that we are playing in it. We need to start recognizing conflict as simply an opposition of needs between two parties, both of whom feel like the victim in a needs conflict. Being aware of that, we need to not get sucked into the fragmentation of this hero and villain and victim dynamic. We have to see that we are all villains, we are all victims, and we are all heroes. We have the seeds of each one of these roles inherent within us. We cannot identify with any one of these roles. We need to see that if both the person we perceive to be the victim in the situation and the person we perceive to be the villain in the story feel like they are the victim, there is much more complex of a situation at hand than meets the eye. We need to stop seeing the bad guy as the bad guy and instead see them as someone who we must work directly with to identify a solution with. We need to begin to own our own needs and our own feelings and to communicate those things directly. Now, communicating them directly, really taking ownership of these things, also involves the fact that we have to acknowledge that somebody else doesn't have the same feeling and needs as ourself. This means we need to get into the discomfort of being willing to confront someone directly to communicate our needs and our feelings. We can't complain about it behind their back without addressing them directly. We also have to accept that, of course, this is probably going to be a needs conflict, meaning their needs are probably going to be opposed to my needs, and I can't automatically turn them into a villain just because their needs oppose my needs. Being accountable for our own feelings and needs means really owning them instead of making it someone else's responsibility. For example, "You are so self-centered" is a victim statement. It creates no opening for resolve. "I feel as if my needs are not getting considered and I need them to be" is a statement in which no victim or villain is created, except feelings and needs were clearly stated. It puts the problem that needs to be resolved on the table and in plain view. As a general rule of thumb, we need to take a totally different approach to conflict than we usually take. If we're getting locked into the hero and the villain and the victim routine, what we do is we try to look for what's right. We got to drop this idea. I mean, totally discard the idea of what's right and wrong and instead adopt the idea that you got to find a way to meet the needs of both people involved. And if you can't do that, we got to create resolve for the feelings on behalf of both parties so that both parties can move forward in a way that feels good to them. Basically, we have to start to see ourselves as partners when it comes to a conflict. Partners in that we both have the mutual commitment and responsibility to find a resolve between us. We need to take the other person as well as their story as if they were a part of us. We need to put ourselves in their shoes. Through mutual understanding, the resolution can actually arise. If we are used to these roles in a conflict, they tend to be resistant to change. This is especially true if we grew up in households where this is the way we learned that conflict should be treated. But I promise you that a good relationship absolutely rests on the other side of learning to abandon these roles that we've been taught are okay to fill. We need to see that the second that we see ourselves as the victim or the hero, or identify somebody else as such, we automatically have created a villain. Now this screws the other person. It pigeonholes them. It means that in that moment, we are essentially attacking their self-concept. We're saying, "You're a bad guy." Now what is this going to do? It's going to trigger somebody, so they're going to see you as the one attacking their self-concept. Now you are the villain in their eyes. So behaviors that they perceive as self-defense will be seen by us as attack and further fuel our idea that they are the villain. It becomes a cycle that only spirals and solidifies the roles until our parties involved are split and fragmented beyond repair, and resolution becomes impossible. So here's a practice. Any time that conflict arises, you should let the conflict itself, or that feeling of angst between people, be like an alarm bell that alerts you, wait. Here is the potential for you to fall into one of three of these roles, either the villain, the victim, or the hero. Now, when you hear that alarm bell go off, make the practice of stepping back from those roles. You also have to ask yourself if you're already in one of these roles relative to this particular conflict. Accept that we are all villains and we are all victims in the very same conflict. We are all innocent and we are all at the same time guilty. Our needs are being threatened and so are theirs. There is no one to defend and no one to fight against. All there is a problem to be solved. Stepping back from these roles helps us to see the difference between the problem and the people involved in that problem. so that we can genuinely commit to resolution, instead of to perpetuating a dynamic to which there is no resolve. Have a good week.